All right, welcome to the Mediacurrent Contrib Half-Hour. It is our first meeting of October 2023. Today we're going to take a look at creating CKEditor 5 plugins with some added benefit of I've actually gotten one to start working as opposed to not working and just taking its tongue out at me going, nah. So, kicking us off with housekeeping, I'm your host, Damien McKenna. I've been involved in the Drupal community since 2007, do a bunch of stuff, but people recognize me as that guy with the bunny ears who hops around the issue queues. My time is sponsored by Mediacurrent. We're an open source product agency, and our commitment to open source goes beyond software. Next week, as mentioned last week, we're going to take a look at the retrofit system, a tool built by Matt Gleman to help sites upgrade from Drupal 7 to Drupal 10. And I'm really interested to see how that works and what it does. Then on the 19th, I wanted to circle back to this topic again, the CKEditor stuff. Just to hopefully finish up and look at a working plugin that was built from scratch. Then on the 26th, we'll have a general chat and look at some news, etc. If there are issues that you'd like us to take a look at, please have them at the ready. And I have not planned anything for November yet, but that's coming up soon. So some news this week from around the Drupal sphere. There was one security update for the mail login module that fixes a bug affecting module for Drupal 9 and above. And there was one bug fix for Drupal 10.1, a whole bunch of small fixes there. Don't think there's anything critical, but do test it out on your site before you, or on a non-production copy of your site before you upload it to production, just in case. And otherwise, the last updates for Drupal 10.0 and 9 were security updates from 2 weeks ago at this point. And Drupal 7 is still holding strong with its 7.98 release. There was one interesting change on the drupal.org/list-changes list of Drupal core changes, that any site that is using the stable 9 theme now has an added class for form fields that will indicate the form type. So I know lots of sites are not sub-theming off of stable, but if you are, or if you're cloning the stable 9 theme, this will give you a little more flexibility in theming the forms. So in a couple of weeks, we have DrupalCon France, DrupalCon Lille, rather. Then November has Drupal GovCon 2023 and then NetCamp 2023. I'm debating on going down to NetCamp. We'll see. Then that brings us to the end of the year. I don't think there are any events going on in December. Then in 2024, we have a couple of events already announced. Florida Drupal Camp in February, Nerd Summit in March, and DrupalCon North America in Pittsburgh. No, not Pittsburgh. Portland, Oregon in May. Anybody have anything they'd like to share with the group? I suspect Marky is at his company retreat, but he's going to DrupalCon Paris. I look forward to hearing back what he thinks of it or thought of it. So let's look into or jump into our main topic for today, CKEditor 5 plugins. So CKEditor 5, in case you weren't aware, is a complete ground-up rewrite of the editor that has been in core since Drupal 8 first showed up. And because it is a complete rewrite, it has absolutely no consideration for API compatibility with plugins from CKEditor 4, which means everything has to be rewritten from scratch. And the good thing is, as mentioned before, CKEditor 5 has been included in Drupal core since 9.3.0. So while there's a major push to get it onto sites for Drupal 10, even if you're still running a site on Drupal 9, you can start working on the upgrade work now in preparation. So again, because CKEditor 5 has a whole new API, it means there's lots of new APIs in CKEditor itself. And there are also new APIs with how you tell Drupal that you have this plugin and how to work with it. And there's a whole new build process you have to use to do your plugin. Otherwise, it won't work. So lots of new stuff. There are thankfully lots of documentation on building plugins and upgrading ones from CKEditor 4 to 5. Many of them available on Drupal.org itself. CKEditor.com, which is the home of CKEditor, has a whole bunch of documentation itself, including some tutorials and guides to hopefully help you build a simple plugin. To give you a bit more help in the right direction, there is a demo module or a development module available called CKEditor 5_dev. It includes a demo submodule that has all of the pieces you need to start building the plugin from scratch yourself. It's one of those awkward things of it's an example that you can take and start working from, but it has its own assumptions and it will take some work to turn that into what you want it to do. I've started working on one myself for the spoiler module, a module that we looked at over the past couple of months to get it to work on Drupal 10, which involved basically rewriting it for Drupal 9+ in the first place, and then throwing in that info file update so that it'll run on D10 as well. But the goal for the plugin for this is to have a very simple plugin for CKEditor that you'd have a toolbar button, and then when you highlight some text and you click the button, it would wrap that text in a span tag, basically. Just to mention, I'll post all of the URLs and everything in the notes when it's posted on the follow-up issue and on the video on YouTube. So I'll get those to you after, Bob. So the idea is to have a very simple, straightforward plugin that doesn't need any extra stuff. It's kind of like another bold tag kind of thing. I wanted very, very simple for my first plugin because there's so much to the CKEditor API. It is very easy to get lost in the examples, in the sample code that you find in the CKEditor code itself, which is written in TypeScript instead of JavaScript. And the Drupal plugins expect, or so far the example from the dev module pushes you in the direction of doing it in bare bones JavaScript as opposed to TypeScript. So being new to this whole thing, there's a lot to get right. So wanted to keep the functionality very, very limited. So what I started with was the bare bones CKEditor 5 dev module that has a demo or example submodule included in it. And then I've been customizing what it provides to make it work the way I want. And it's almost there. I'll get into these in with the text editor in a moment, but there are a number of files that I've created. There's a CKEditor.yaml file, namespace for the module. So it's spoiler.ckeditor5.yaml. This is the file that lists all of the plugins available to CKEditor 5. So you don't need an annotation, you don't need an SRC file or anything. It's not dealing with the PSR4 SRC directory. This is just providing a YAML file that defines what the plugin is. Then one thing that was in the example that wasn't clear is that you also need an item in a libraries.yaml file, because following on off of that, you need a CSS file for telling the Drupal text filter UI how to find the icon that is used on the text filter admin page. And then you have an SVG file for the toolbar. And I'll show that in just a second. I opened up a core issue about this because it's a bit of a head scratcher why you need a CSS file to load an SVG for the toolbar rather than the toolbar icon being defined in the plugin, but that's for another day. For the JavaScript side of things, there is a package.json file created that lists the dependencies needed and the pieces needed for the build process. And then you have a Webpack config file that instructs the Webpack tool on where to find the source files and what the output file should be called. And that leads to, when you run it, you end up with a file in the js/build directory that is named after the directory, a subdirectory in the JS CKEditor5_plugins directory. And in there you have an index.js, and that's kind of the primary starting point for the plugin itself. We'll get to that in a moment. Couple of things to note. There's a kind of magic name. In this case, I used because it's for the spoiler module, I used the name spoiler plugin. That is taken from the directory name of the CKEditor5_plugins directory. So if I had called it plugin icon, plugin button, that becomes the name of the file name used for the plugin. That when the build process runs, it creates a file with that name, with the .js extension, in the js/build directory. But all of that is controlled by the Webpack config file. which took a little reading through and playing with to work out and get that straight in my head. And then I forgot to note, but that file then is listed in the CKEditor 5.yaml file that we'll see in a moment. In addition to that, there are two different places where you need to specify the icon file. So the SVG file that you use in the toolbar, presuming that you need an SVG file for a toolbar icon, you have to list it in the admin CSS file that is loaded on the text filters admin page. And then it's also defined in one of the files for one of the JavaScript files inside the CKEditor 5 plugins subdirectory. We'll get into that detail next time, but I will take a look at the text filter side of things. So let's dive in and see what we have so far. And as always, I'm using my handy dandy TextMate editor because I'm silly like that. So starting with the CKEditor 5.yaml file, you specify a plugin name. So it's common to namespace them. So if you have two different modules, they don't both have a plugin named button. So on the off chance I do another plugin later, I named it spoiler alert, but it could also be spoiler button or something. So this is the YAML file, so it's nested strings, but there's a CKEditor piece and it defines the plugin name. So the plugin name is spoiler plugin, and inside that there's a class called spoiler. There are some other things that can be done there, but that's it for now. In the Drupal side of things, you have a label that is shown on the text text filters admin page, and there is a library that is loaded when the toolbar is loaded for the editor UI. So when you're actually creating text, when you have the WYSIWYG displaying, CKEditor displaying, this file, or this library will be loaded. So you can load extra CSS, JavaScript, etc. if needed. There's an admin library piece that is needed. As mentioned, you have to specify the icon that's used in the toolbar through CSS, and that is through the admin library item, and which was very confusing at first, but once you realize that extra step, it's quick to throw together again because we have the examples. Then you have the toolbar items that are provided. So this specifies that with it's kind of a indirect, I guess, connection between the plugin and the toolbar. I'm not entirely sure why it's also needed, but in this case, it's specifying the name of a button or of a toolbar icon or item, and it gives the name. It feels a little redundant, but Maybe a little too verbose. Then one other item is the elements item. This is a key piece of the plugin definition. This is where you tell it what HTML structures, what DOM structures this plugin is going to use. So in this case, and you have to be specific and a little verbose over the possibilities. So if, for example, you want to use, in this case, span class equals spoiler, you have to also specify the base tag. So I have to specify span and the span class spoiler. There are lots of other examples on doing this. Again, I'm trying to do a simple one for now. And this relates to the text filter system for automatically filtering out HTML tags that are not supported. So the idea is that you're telling the WYSIWYG, you're telling the text format that this plugin creates tags, HTML structures like this. And so if this plugin is enabled on the toolbar, don't filter out these tags. So let's see. Ddev start. Thought I had this installed or enabled already. I forgot to start Ddev. So let's take a quick look. D101. All right. So I have my plugin. Let's make sure that it is running correctly or installed. I think it is. Spoiler is installed. So let's go take a look at the text formats and basic HTML. So the icon that I'm using is just a small bomb because it stood out. I got that from some site or other that is mentioned in the docs. But the idea is that you have I created the plugin and it adds a toolbar icon. As mentioned before, this icon that you see on the filters page is controlled not by the CKEditor 5 plugin file, but rather the admin library that is loaded then says, load this background image. It's a little strange, but at least for now, just kind of go with it. But once you have that all in place, then you have the spoiler, or you have your plugin showing up in the toolbar. As mentioned before, in this plugin, there's an elements item that corresponds to when you have the limit allowed HTML tags and correct faulty HTML filter enabled, because that connects to the plugin specified by CKEditor 5 here, and it will automatically update the allowed tags based on what is set up in the toolbar, which is a really, really nifty thing. But when you're building your plugin, it's an extra step you have to go through. And that has a setting down here. So you turn on the filter, or sorry, back up to the top, you enable CKEditor 5 in your text filter. You add your icons to the toolbar, and then you add the enable allow HTML tags and correct faulty HTML filter. And in its settings down here, you can see it lists span class spoiler. and that is the spoiler or the tag specified here. And as you can see, it shows up here. I'm going to just clear the cache real quick because I believe I'm a little confused on this distinction, because those of you with keen eyesight might have noticed that in the elements list, I specified span, but span on its own does not show up in the allowed HTML tags. I'm not 100% sure why that's the case, why it's needed in the elements list, but not needed in the allowed HTML, or not added to the allowed HTML tags. The allowed HTML tags might infer it. I don't know for certain, but I don't think there's anything, at least, I don't think there's anything wrong doing it this way, especially when the examples say you need to do it anyway. So the idea then is you have this all together. So then you go to your node form and you have the icon showing up. And that is as far as we're going today. The next steps are going to be to get this to work as expected. I haven't gotten that part working fully correct yet because it is a whole new language, so to speak. A whole new world. And I'm completely new to working with CKEditor 5 plugins, so there's a lot to wade through to get it running. But I intend to do so before our next meeting, so that we'll have something to look at and poke a stick at, and then be able to learn from for other ones. But I hope that has been helpful. Any questions on this so far?
It's all very confusing.
It is. One of the things I felt going through this, and let me show you, where is it? The CKEditor 5 dev thing. So there's this directory with a whole bunch of files, CKEditor 5 plugin starter template, that is in the CKEditor 5 dev module. And I really feel like this could be the basis for a drush command for generating these files. Or another tool, but basically this could be wrapped up in a generator that would automatically create the files for you, or even just modify the existing files. So if you have an existing module, it would just create the files that are needed, and you would give it a name for your plugin, and it would just put it all together, have the icon for you, have the necessary pieces in place so you could start building from something, because there's a lot of boilerplate pieces needed. And
so did you start with a copy of that?
Yes, I started with a copy of this, renamed stuff, broke the build a million times because I didn't know what I was changing. Another thing I ran into was, that we'll look at next time, some of the examples that you find on the CKEditor site are structured slightly differently. They combine some of the pieces into one file instead of splitting it up into separate files. And so when I didn't know what I was doing, that was rather confusing. But kind of learning to build a fire. Eventually, I learned to not set fire to the rest of the house and just keep the fire contained to the fireplace. So,
good thing.
yeah, one step at a time.
Yeah.
And I've got the build to the point where it actually compiles and doesn't say it's done, but then I don't know what to do with it. So it's getting there, one piece at a time. That's it for this week. Thank you for joining us, and we'll be back again next week. Hope you all have a fantastic week. Thank you.
Thanks, Damien. You too.